It had been a long, long day of teaching, and he was wiped out. So many people had come to hear him that he had to climb into a boat to keep teaching the crowd swarming on the shoreline. He told them story after story about farming and seeds and how those were like God's kingdom. But now he was tired. The day was done. He had no more words left. His friends joined him in the boat, and they headed for the other side of the lake. And that's where we pick up today's lesson from the Gospel of Mark, continuing chapter 4, verses 35 through 41. Listen for a word from God. Later that day, when evening came, Jesus said to them, "Let's cross over to the other side of the lake." They left the crowd and took him in the boat just as he was. Other boats followed along. Gale force winds arose and waves crashed against the boat so that the boat was swamped. But Jesus was in the rear of the boat, sleeping on a pillow. They woke him up and said, "Teacher, don't you care that we are drowning?" He got up and gave orders to the wind, and he said to the lake, "Silence, be still." The wind settled down, and there was a great calm. Jesus asked them, "Why are you frightened? Don't you have faith yet?" Overcome with awe, they said to each other, "Who then is this? Even the wind and the sea obey him." May this word of God speak to us here, this day. When it comes to this story, commentators over the generations have loved to point out how Jesus reveals his power to control nature, the wind and the waves of the storm. Just a word from him, hush, and all is calm. The storm listens to him and settles down. A power I suspect many parents of toddlers wishes they had, especially when those tantrums come. One word and the tantrum and storm passes. But this presents a deeply troubling theological issue for us. Why did Jesus calm that storm and doesn't seem interested in calming any of the other natural disasters we small humans on earth suffer? Do you ever wonder that? In just this past week, this topic came up both at a visit I had with someone who's not too interested in church but wanted to talk about God, and with the confirmation class youth. Why doesn't Jesus calm the storms of our lives? What kind of God could act and instead chooses to do nothing? How can that be a God of love? It's one of those questions that once you start asking, you go down a really dark, black hole of questions without satisfying answers. Does God control everything? Could God have stopped the California drought or the wildfires or the life-threatening heat? And if the Almighty could have and chooses not to, what does that say about God? About our Maker's love? I told the man I was visiting that it sounded as though that wasn't really a God he could believe in or trust. Honestly, neither can I. And what's so curious about this passage is that the disciples don't wake Jesus up to say, "Do something! Stop this storm! We know you can! Do something!" No, they're scared out of their minds. It feels like they are about to drown in the crashing waves flooding their little boat, and they wake Jesus up to ask, do you remember? Do you remember what they asked Jesus? They asked Jesus, "Don't you care? Don't you care that we are drowning? Don't you care that our lives are in danger? Don't you care that we are perishing?" Even though at least 4 people on that boat were experienced sailors, apparently this storm brought a level of fear that literally drowned out their skills and apparently their faith as well. But to me, that's the crux of this story. Don't you care? Because I think that's one of the deepest, most real questions we all carry in our hearts. Not so much whether or not our Lord can control natural disasters. In fact, I don't think that's what all-powerful means when it comes to our Maker. Of course, we human beings understand power a certain way. The power to make people do what we want them to do. The power to control our external world. The power to do whatever we want, whenever we want, with whatever we want. We understand power to be control. The power to make the world the way we want it to be. And we aren't so good at it. Think goats that were brought in on pirate ships that destroyed the habitat on the Galapagos Islands. Or think about the ill-conceived idea of bringing mongoose, who sleep at night, onto the big island of Hawaii to take care of the rats, again, that came in on pirate ships. Rats sleep during the day. We humans control. That's our definition of power, not God's. The Creator did not go about making all of this stupendous creation in order to control it, but rather to love it all, to be in relationship with it all. And if you have any sort of relationship with all, and let's face it, that's what it means to be a human being made in the image of our Creator, we're automatically in relationship with the world around us, with people and plants and weather, everything. And relationships built on trying to force the other person to do what we think they should, those aren't really sustainable over the long haul. I mean, you can try. I know I have a time or two, but I also know it's a great way to make yourself miserable. Thank goodness that's not what love looks like. Love is not controlling everything around you, including the people in your life, to suit what you think is best. But that doesn't make it easy to be in relationship. If you're like me, those relationships don't always go well. It's not always smooth sailing. Sometimes there are storms. Sometimes those relationships can be the most frustrating part of our life. And that's when I have to remember the phrase my therapist told me years ago. Connect without control. Connect without control. Because that's what love looks like. And that is sometimes impossible for this little human to put into practice every day, but that's the power of God. The power to connect in love with all creation, without controlling all creation. All powerful for God doesn't mean coercion or control. It means the power to love all the time, no matter what. It's the power of love. Actor and podcaster Dax Shepard says that because his childhood was chaotic, he, as an adult, he tends to like chaos. He's drawn to it. It's hard for him to resist. He likes that rush of adrenaline that means he's ready to fight, to defend the underdog. He describes how it took him years to realize he had a choice. He didn't have to jump into the middle of chaos. He didn't have to go out seeking it. And when he found himself in the whirlwind of high emotions and bad decisions and a storm going on, whether that storm was inside his own mind or outside him, he had choices. He could make a choice. He had that power. There were other options available to him when the chaos descended, other than making the chaos worse. And so I wonder if the disciples were witnessing a new way to be in the midst of chaos. A non-panicking, calm, centered presence in the person of Jesus. Now, we know emotions are incredibly contagious. We're learning more and more about that, about our mirror neurons that pick up on what's going on in other people's heads and in their hearts. Have you ever walked onto a college campus during finals week? Have you ever left the dinner table to get something from the kitchen, only to come back and sense the whole mood of the table has turned? No one has to say a word. We're social creatures. We pick up anxiety and fear and stress from the people around us. And then we spin round and round and round, and we want others to join us so that we don't feel alone. Even though that doesn't really help anything or anyone, it sure isn't the way back to faith. This story of the storm and the boat and Jesus asleep and then calming the storm, it's such a great story for us human beings. The disciples are so caught up in their fear that not only their skills, but their faith is drowned out. The storm feels so life-threatening to them. And Jesus, he sleeps through it. I love how they don't ask him to fix it, only that he cares about them and what they're going through. And I love that the wind literally grew weary. That's what the Greek says, because that is what storms do in our lives, in our minds, in our world. They do grow weary. And it's then that Jesus answers their question, "Don't you care?" with a question of his own. He's really good at that. He wants to know, why are you frightened? And I've always heard it in my head like a scolding parent. Why are you still afraid? There's nothing to be scared of here. That's silly to be scared of nothing. But what if Jesus is asking with compassion and care? "Oh, sweeties, tell me, what is scaring you?" Like, he really wants to know. He wants them to look inside themselves and figure out what is scaring them, what's going on inside them. And he says, I'm right here with you. Just open your heart and look inside. It's as though he knows at that moment they will find faith. So what are those disciples telling themselves? How are they responding to this storm? Have they let fear take the wheel? It seems pretty obvious they have. But that's natural. Fear literally swamps our brains with hormones and chemicals because our brains care first and foremost about survival. And if anything threatens that, boom, a flood of hormones takes over your whole body so that you're ready to run or freeze and deliberate later. But this storm is over. And Jesus asked them, what about it frightened them? Because he knows there's always another storm on the horizon. And we know there's always another storm coming, even as we're stepping out from the storm that was the global pandemic. Jesus is inviting them. Now that I've shown you that there are options other than fear, maybe you can choose faith to go along with that fear. You don't have to let fear drown out everything. You can have both. You can have faith in the midst of fear, in the midst of chaos. We, like the disciples, were made so we can think about what is scaring us. We can lean on our faith. We can remember Jesus staying calm in the midst of chaos. We can remember the practices that remember us, that remind us our God is a God of love. That love is more powerful than any other force on this earth. It's so powerful, it will never let us go. Nothing can separate us from the love of God. That love is right here for us, beneath the fear that consumes us. As we step out, let us step out with faith, not just fear of the future, fear of the next storm, fear of the uncertainty of what life is going to look like now. Fear does not have to drown out faith. Have faith in God's presence, in God's love, in the midst of the chaos that is and always has been the human journey. What are we scared of? And then faith. Thanks be to God.